Welcome to another episode of Monday Night Therapy, and you need therapy because it's the off season. It's the off season, and life is a lot more miserable without football than it is with it. And I don't. The USFL, are they playing now? They don't count. I still haven't gotten into that very far. Joining us is Scott Dochterman of who covers Iowa for the Athletic. And welcome, Scott. And we're glad you're joining us to talk about Iowa. I mean, mostly football, but whatever comes up, like the big news that was announced today. We can.
Yeah, it's been
What
a busy day, that's for
do you
sure.
do? You want to start there?
Fire away. Yeah, I mean, it's been a day. I mean, when I had to write about both Iowa and Iowa State and stuff, and so who knows what's going on. I know. Let's get the jokes out of the way early. I'm sure there were people were taking the under on football. So that
Well,
was probably the good
my
one.
biggest joke is that I had to prepare for this show by washing all the Iowa hate off me, and it took a lot of deep scrubbing.
Yeah,
Go.
we're going to be nice. We're going to be as nice as we can tonight, Scott. So we really do want to talk about the Iowa
Yeah.
Hawkeyes, and kind of have a peaceful conversation.
No, you bet. That's I think it's the same everywhere. I mean, you get to this point after spring football, you're starting to get to a little bit between spring and summer, and everybody's kind of looking forward to what's coming up next, and where everybody's kind of on edge, waiting. Okay, when are the first 3 weeks for kickoff times going to come, and then specialty dates, Black Friday being among them, homecomings, some other ones. So I think we're all kind of angling for what's coming up in 3.5 to 4 months.
Okay, so the news today, May 8th, 2023, it's the University of Iowa actually has a notice or a an article on their website stating that they are investigating the involvement of Iowa athletes in gambling allegations of they did things wrong in gambling. I understand the same thing is going on at Iowa State. The notice on the University of Iowa website says the university has received information about 111 individuals, 26 current student athletes from baseball, football, men's basketball, men's track and field, and men's wrestling, as well as one full-time employee. Holy, this Todd and I were just talking about gambling before you got here, and Todd mentioned that gambling is kind of wide open in the state of Iowa. Nebraska, I guess, doesn't have gambling or something. I live in Minnesota,
Okay.
and I don't gamble anyway. So, what do you know about what's going on with this gambling stuff?
Uh, well, there's so much, as you can imagine, speculation and hyperbole and what have you that's going on with this, that I try to keep it pretty narrow right now, just until I start to acquire more information. But when you do have 26 student athletes at Iowa, 15 at Iowa State, who are under investigation by the Iowa Racing and Gaming Commission for gambling, and presumably again on collegiate sports, that is a big time concern. So I think right now it's something that everybody's got to be cognizant of. The baseball team this weekend, their best player, best hitter anyway, Keaton Anthony, was withheld and for 3 games because of potential NCAA violations. So that certainly kind of points the finger at him. But what's the big picture? Who was involved? What were they doing? Were they betting on, you would hope if they're betting on their own sport, they're not going to play anywhere. If they're betting on a friend's, then I think you look at it and go, okay, what's going to be the penalty there? There's just a lot involved. I'm only scratching the surface, and so I don't really have too many more details other than all this, again, some of the stuff on the side that I've heard that's probably not accurate enough for me to really discuss.
So, I mean, Alabama's baseball coach threw his career away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, that's it. Nobody's going to hire him for that. That's one thing in baseball that you just don't do. Ask Pete Rose, I guess. But I don't get it. I honestly don't get why you. I understand that kids are young and student athletes are young, and somebody promises you stuff or things, but that's something that people just never. It's odd, which is really, I think, odd.
Yeah.
Well,
I
they've had cheating scandals and point shaving in college athletics, going back a long, long time. And there have been different eras. And, I think it was like Boston College or something. They had a big deal with basketball a few years ago. Well, quite a few years ago now. What kind of surprises me a little bit about it in this day and age is, 30, 40 years ago, even if you were a scholarship athlete, you didn't have money in your pockets. You didn't have a whole lot of spending money unless you had some kind of something going on under the table back then. And I think some of those student athletes were a lot easier targets, or at least I would have thought they were easier targets than the athletes today who seem to have more disposable income and nil and some of those other types of things going on. But I don't know, gambling in sports just makes me very, very nervous, and it always has.
Yeah, it's obviously a concern, and now this is for everybody outside of the state of Iowa and Alabama. It's a teachable moment, and I don't think that this is going to be the last one. I think you're going to see probably some other universities and conferences crack down, and this will just be one of the more prominent ones.
I would venture to say that compliance officers at Division I schools right now are working overtime.
Yeah,
I would
That's pretty true.
I would venture to say that's happening. So,
yeah.
well, we're going to know more about how this all shakes down, I'm sure, Scott, in the next few days. I would guess that information will come out. And, that Anthony kid's a hell of a player.
Yeah.
And it would be, well, he would have no one to blame but himself, but doggone it. I mean, he's a hell of a player. Good one.
Yeah, no question. It's going to be, who bet on what and what will be the ramifications will be the interesting thing. Because I think anybody is reasonable enough to say that if somebody bet on their own sport, that they should no longer be playing that sport in college ever. Not for Iowa, not for anybody. If you're betting on, if it's the Iowa South Carolina women's basketball game at the Final Four, that's something else. But I know people have kind of wondered about, well, they do have more money, but people still go to gambling casinos and boats, whether they have money or not. I remember doing it when I was in college. Now I'd probably do it less than I did then, which is kind of funny. I do have a little bit more money than I did back then. But it's part of the thrill, I would say. But there does need to be some stronger indications from the governing body, the NCAA, the Big Ten Conference, and the schools themselves. And what are the rules? What will they allow these athletes in the future? But anyway, that's something that hopefully we get more and more information about in the coming days.
All right, football, because let's be honest, that's what we want to do.
Yeah.
Iowa football next year, 2023. You have quarterback Cade McNamara, transfer from Michigan. Running back Caleb Johnson, probably starter, set the freshman record with 779 yards. You have Luke Leahy. Is it Leahy?
Lachey.
Lachey.
Yeah.
Tight end Luke Lachey. And I mean, Sam Laporta just got drafted, the first round?
Second round, 34th pick. Yeah.
And you have wide receiver Nico Reganey and Ohio State transfer 4-star recruit Caleb Brown.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I said all this, and like I said, I washed all the Iowa hate off me, which means I'm trying to be objective as possible. I look at those skill position players and I say Iowa should be a really good offense next year. That's what I want you to respond to.
Should be a good offense. I'm going to reserve judgment because I had to watch the last 2 years and multiple times, not just on Saturdays, but Sundays in a rewatch and try to figure out what was going on. But realistically, they hit the portal pretty hard for Iowa. Iowa's not a real big portal team. They usually just do it to supplement. A lot of times if it's, hey, there's a defensive tackle from Northern Illinois that wants to come play, that's good. But in this case, they hit 7 on offense and 1 on defense, and all 7 on offense will be 2 deep guys. Cade McNamara, a quarterback that led Michigan to the Big Ten title 2 years ago, is coming here, and he's filling the part. And then if you look at quarterback by itself over the last few years, and the Brian Ferentz card is always going to come up, but in Brian's first 3 years, Nate Stanley, who I think people here would say was pretty good, not great, but pretty good. He had 68 touchdown passes in 3 years. The quarterbacks, mostly Spencer Petras, but also Alex Padilla, combined for 28 the last 3 years. That's a 40 touchdown difference in a 2 different 3-year blocks. And then you look at wide receiver, they did pick up 2 in the transfer portal. Caleb Brown, from Ohio State, was a top 100 guy. Iowa doesn't get those guys, at wide receiver on a regular basis. And Seth Anderson from Charleston Southern, whose dad, Flipper Anderson, played for the Rams about 30 years ago. Eric All, who was at Michigan and a really good player. He got hurt last year and didn't played only in a few games, but he's going to combine with Luke Lachey and have a pretty good tight end combo. And then they picked up 2 others on the offensive line. So, 7 guys on the 2 deep, including another backup quarterback who's probably better, dare I say, than anybody who was there last year. You'd think that they'd be better because you can't be worse. Now, will they be good? I'm not going to say good. I'll say better. And what that ends up being, we'll find out come this fall.
Iowa has made their bread and butter on offense for the last 2 decades with a lot of homegrown offensive linemen. And in fact, Iowa in the last 20 years has looked a lot like what Nebraska was like in the 20 years prior to that.
Yeah, right.
Talk to me, Scott, a little bit about that offensive line at Iowa. Last year, they were not the typical offensive line, and maybe they weren't the year before either.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the story with the offensive line in Iowa, and why are they so damn successful when they're successful?
Well, I guess, here's what typically happens at Iowa, that even when they're not great, they're good. And that is because they kind of have a stagger, that they might have like 2 or 3 seniors every year, 2 or 3 juniors, and a younger player who kind of rotates. Like they might have a senior guard who rotates with a freshman, and then maybe a sophomore. And then by the time that they get a little bit older, then they kind of do the same thing and it trickles down. Well, the problem Iowa's faced the last 2 years was their 2018 and 19 offensive line classes were complete wipeouts. There were transfers. One of them went to Nebraska. I don't think he played for you either, Ezra Miller. Yeah, but he was a 4-star. Everybody expected him to, be a good player, and it didn't work out for him at Iowa. And they had a couple of injuries, and then there was only one player who was on the roster last year who saw any action, and his contribution was very, 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 very small. So they're basically playing with 3 classes, the oldest being sophomores who still had a lot to learn. Logan Jones, who's from the Council Bluffs area, was a defensive tackle. They flipped him over to center to replace Tyler Linderbaum. And he had some struggles, but he was also, you could see he had a good starter kit for that position. He was a year away. They had 2 other sophomores who would have been rotational guys maybe in the past, or a guard, and then they ended up playing tackle. And so there were some freshmen who got starts who normally would not. So they kind of were fighting an uphill battle there. And in the past, it's just the way they build them is why they've been so successful. And then you get a guy like a Tristan Wirfs, and you're like, okay, this guy, there's a reason why he's an all-pro at the next level. But I would expect them to be better this year, and I'm kind of hedging on that a little bit. But I think Mason Richmond, he's been a 2-year starter at left tackle as a freshman and sophomore. He played defense in high school. I think he'll be, a pretty good player. Connor Colby is a guy that I think will be, a next level player. He's a junior. He started as a true freshman and sophomore. And Logan Jones, I think, is pretty good. It's just going to be, can they kind of work together? I expect them to be better. good. Again, I want to see it before I'll say, yeah, they're going to be right up there. But I do expect them to compete in a better way than they have before.
So when you go through this, the offense looks pretty good, like on paper.
Yeah,
Better.
better.
Okay,
Yeah. That's the word of the
then,
day. Better. Yeah.
But then we get back to that one guy,
Mm-hmm.
and I really okay. The real question is this:
Mm-hmm.
is the last 2 years because of bad quarterbacks, bad players, or is it because the offensive coordinator really isn't very good at his job? I mean, where's the balance here with Iowa on the offense?
It's definitely chicken or the egg, and I guess we'll find out a lot more this year for sure. But in Brian's, and I don't want to come across as a defender or a proponent of Brian Ferentz, but just try to present it in a fair way, which most fans do not want to hear these days. They just want, everybody to throw tomatoes at Brian. And what I do say is, look at the quarterback percent. They haven't changed the offense, so it was quarterback productivity that mattered when Nate Stanley could throw 68 touchdowns versus 28 the last 3 years. There's a big reason. It's not Brian Ferentz. He's calling the same plays. Last year was kind of everything fell apart for them, especially early at the same time when they had so many offensive line problems, when they only had one scholarship receiver who was available. And then they had a quarterback who was very inaccurate. And then you combine all of that. There's not a play in the world. I mean, when they only had one scholarship receiver available the first 2 games against Iowa State and South Dakota State, they couldn't even go to 3 wide receiver sets because otherwise you're throwing 2 walk-ons on the field. You're not doing anything. It was madness. But, Brian has done some good things in the past. 2020, they were second in the Big Ten in scoring offense. When they were 6-2 that COVID year, and in 2018 when they had Hawkinson and Fant, they were, I think
Right.
4th, but it was still close to 32 points a game. So they've got that in their back pocket. But there are other things that I look at with Brian and the coordination and the style of play and the lack of change. Play calling inside the red zone to me is probably the biggest factor in why I would be critical of him. That there's not a lot of depth to the routes or spacing of the routes, and I think that's been an issue. Sometimes they're too reliant on running outside zone when in fact that it should be they need to have more pre-snap motion because Iowa loves the cut block, but they're almost legislating that out of the game. So they got to find a way to do that. So, if nothing else, whether it's Kirk propping up Brian or if he believes Brian's a good coach and he's just been kind of let down by the situation, we'll find out a lot this fall because Cade McNamara is an established quarterback. I'm not going to say he's an NFL guy, but he's at least competent and good. They've got Eric All's an NFL tight end. Luke Lachey is an NFL tight end. His dad was a 3-time All-Pro. He's from Ohio State and All-American. I think, the receivers seem to me to have a little more talent, and the offensive line should come out. So will that put them over to the high 20s, low 30s in points? It very well could. And then it doesn't look like a Brian Ferentz thing. But what will then is what happens when it's a close game in a pivotal game and a game that matters. What kind of plays is he calling and designing? That to me will tell us a lot about Brian Ferentz and his future.
Scott, I want to talk a little bit about Coach Ferentz and Captain Kirk a little bit. And, I've been pretty blunt when I've talked about Iowa football in the Nebraska community and stuff.
Yeah.
But you have to respect this. And I'm not saying anything any different than I would any other day. You have to respect Kirk Ferentz because the guy has succeeded. He has had success. He has developed players. My goodness, he and his coaching staff had 6 NFL draft choices or draft picks this year. Kirk Ferentz is a very good football coach. Why? How is it that they can develop these players the way they develop these players, because they're not bringing in, 4-star and 5-star talent. They're bringing in 3-star talent. And, I just, off the top of my head, you've got Tyler Linderbaum from Solon, 2A school in Iowa, 3A, I think, in football.
Yeah.
You got Hawkinson from Sheraton, little town in South Central. You've got Tristan Wirfs from Mount Vernon, another smaller school. You got Captain Jack from up there in Cedar Falls. How are these Iowa kids being developed into these NFL players?
It's a holistic approach, and it's one that I'm sure that's familiar to what you watched going up until the 20 years ago, and it's one that Iowa emulates, not necessarily the Nebraska way, but it's that approach, which is it's developmental. It doesn't shy away from that. It embraces it. Iowa is a developmental program. They do not go out and get 4 and 5-star guys. Maybe they'll get 3 or 4 a year, but that's about it. And what they have to do is they look for, they're very selective in how they recruit. They have a low offer list, usually a little over 100, that it's really intangible based, as long as they hit those markers that they look at and they see how they can develop, and they check out things. Most of them are team captains in high school. Most of them are usually pretty good students. They've got decent athletic ability, multi-sport athletes, and their competitiveness is at a high level. So they bring them in. They're not afraid to redshirt, but they're also not afraid to play them. And then they set a goal for them, and they're very disciplined in their approach. And it's about, building. You're never arrived, but it's not a boring concept, but it's just about, rounding them up. And when you're looking at the players you mentioned and some of the others that are from either, from Iowa or Central Illinois, or these places that have been overlooked, under recruited, they don't really go to the camps. They come in, they have kind of a chip on their shoulder, and then they get to work, and they just have that kind of mindset. And it really is paid off for them, because, there have been players that, even I remember Nathan Budgeta, who's a Nebraskan, and Drew Ott, of course, who I thought was fantastic. Both of those guys were not offered by Nebraska. And then they came to Iowa, and Drew in particular took off. And Nathan was just he was 6 foot, nothing, 280 pounds probably, but just a feisty, tough kid that really bought in and built his way up, and then he became a good player. And so I think that process is what's worked for them. It's what's worked for Wisconsin over the years. It's really comparable. There's different styles, but they play the same way and have the same tenets until this year. And Minnesota has. And that's always been the thing I've thought about with Nebraska, since they've come in, is there's no reason whatsoever that Nebraska can't be on the same line, at least as Wisconsin or an Iowa. It's just kind of that attention to detail and consistency and a consistent approach. And if that could ever match, you don't have to obviously try to be Iowa or Wisconsin. There's the aspirations are beyond that, but it's also, if you stick to the process and just continuously try to improve, and you don't deal with the transfer portal, all the attrition that Nebraska's had, and then in style and scheme, and just focus on one day at a time, all the boring cliches, which I think Matt Rule is probably more subscribed to than Scott Frost did, then I think ultimately that 3-star kid from Nebraska will end up being a kick-ass player for you, just like in the Osborne years and Frank Solich years.
John, I want you to put Fred's serious question up here in a minute.
But we were gonna go to comments and clear those out.
Okay. But a question I have, and I've not paid as much attention in the last few years. Coach Ferentz does he still have a pretty doggone experienced staff? I mean, is Reese Morgan still around, and some of those other guys that seem like they've been there forever? I know Norm Parker, obviously is still there.
Well, Norm passed.
Not
Back.
Norm. Phil. My
Phil,
bad.
yeah,
My
Phil, Phil's, yeah, that's all right. Phil's been with them since day one, and Phil's a real loyal guy. There've been a lot of SEC schools that have tried to poach him, and he's just said, "No, I'm here." And you know, one of the things they have evolved defensively under Phil. They used to be a strong, just straight up 4-3 team, and they would do some loops and stunts and different things, but really were pretty basic. And then about 5 years ago, they flipped to more of a 4-2-5, and they play that a little bit more often, actually a lot more often now than they do a 4-3. And it's really worked. So yeah, he's been there. Reese retired a couple of years ago.
Okay.
That was tough for them from a recruiting standpoint more than anything. I mean, Reese is a great teacher and just your classic coach. He was a high school Hall of Fame coach before.
Yeah, Reese is a good man. I've met Reese.
Yeah. And, you know, recruited the state so well, and everybody knew him and respected him. So that's been a chore for Iowa, and probably they've lost a couple of recruits because of that. And certainly Iowa State has been more difficult for Iowa than in the past, certainly in Des Moines. But yeah, they've got a pretty, you know, deep staff, an experienced staff, and that consistency helps, I think.
Okay, we're going to take some comments. Lemansky asks, has Kirk been sounding confident on the 2023 offensive line?
Kirk and Brian both, but Kirk in particular has kind of altered his message a little bit, where he's a little bit more direct this year. There's not as much friendly banter. And I think some of that is everything from, you know, the settlement that was forced upon them in the court case to you know, Brian's contract revision, and, you know, and having his 25 point per game, you know, the drive for 325, as it's been kind of said. You know, I think he's been a little bit more that way, but you know, so confident, you know, I think he's been saying all along that in order for Iowa to be good on offense, it has to be good up front. And I think he feels like this unit is taking a step forward. And, you know, he's never been over the top in how if he says something to the effect of, yeah, I think we'll be pretty good, then you know that he thinks they're going to be really good. It's just, you know, so he's just kind of a matter of, with him, he seems confident that they're taking steps forward, but I don't think he's ready to anoint them as, you know, some of the reincarnated better Iowan lines of the past.
Oh, shoot. Let's go with Fred's question. Fred Sacco says, in a serious question, because he has to put that at the beginning.
With Fred, we need that from Fred. We do need
with Fred. We need to know that he's asking a serious question.
Okay, gotcha.
God knows what we get into with Fred. Fred says, serious question for Scott. Do you think Ferentz and co. have become complacent with their Iowa way and lean on somewhat basic practices and just assume they'll roll out wins in NFL, guys?
It's always been discussed here, you know, that there's been some sort of complacency, and I don't think that's the case. I think if it was part of the case, it was maybe 7-8 years ago that it seemed to be that way, but they've made some changes, and they've changed their approach. They've changed, you know, this year to the transfer portal. You know, they do what they do, and they try to do it well. That's kind of but I think that goes to the consistency here. And, you know, generally they play most of their opponents pretty close. Last year, Ohio State notwithstanding, because they, you know, I mean, they had 6 turnovers, and that's just un-Iowa-like in its own right, let alone against a team like Ohio State. But other than that, they usually compete pretty well with most teams. And so it's just a matter of getting enough players to make plays in those games and win them. So do they play too close to the vest for some people? Yeah, of course. They get bored with it a little bit, but it's also about winning. And the NFL part of it is just kind of an extension, because they are so well coached in most cases. And people, you know, it does work as a double-edged sword for some NFL teams, though, because they look at Iowa and say, are they a finished product? Is there any more left to them? Or are they just, you know, because what you see is what you get, and that's great, but is there more? And for some players like George Kittle, there absolutely is more. But for a lot of them, it's like, well, I think we're getting kind of what we're getting. And maybe we just, you know, they get drafted in the 4th or 5th round instead of 2nd or 3rd, which is maybe the way they played while they're in college.
Okay, we got
You mentioned George Kittle, and that just, my goodness, Iowa has just turned out the tight ends in the last 5 to 10 years. I mean, it's just nuts how
Yeah.
many they've cranked out.
Yeah, they've got 5 on NFL rosters right now, and you got Kittle, who was a 5th-round draft pick. I actually stayed with him during the draft for the second night and the third day, just to be embedded with him during the whole thing. They've got 2 first-rounders in Hawkinson and Fant, and they're starters. Sam Laporta was drafted 34 overall, so just outside the first round. And then another guy, Parker Hesse, who was a defensive end, flipped over, and now he plays tight end for the Atlanta Falcons. He's been there for 5 years. So he
walk-on kid, walk-on,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
2-star walk-on, and for walk-on Iowa, and then and just ended up a 4-year starter, and but he was 6'3", 260, just not going to be a NFL guy at that position. So moved over, and hey, he's earning a paycheck.
Yeah, I remember a couple of nights when my beloved Tiger Hawks from North Fayette Valley played against him, and that was a man against boys. He was a man against boys. Yeah.
Tough kid.
Yeah. Okay, Terrell Farley's taint asks, how hot is Brian Ferentz's seat, and would Kirk sacrifice his job for Brian? And really the question behind this is Kirk, is there a hot seat for Kirk? I mean, he seems to.
Does Kirk get to make? Does he get to decide? Is Kirk going to decide when he gets to go?
Kirk Ferentz is going to decide when he gets to go. Brian Ferentz, the issue that happened a couple months ago with his contract, he had his salary reduced, he had his 2-year rollover stopped, so he has to hit 25 points per game. And then if he does hit that, and then they win 7 games, which I think they should do, then it'll be reinstated. He'll get a bonus, and then he'll go back to what he was. And I think in some ways you look at Brian. Yeah, Kirk is sticking his neck out for him, because all these changes here, with the transfer portal, and they brought in, a special assistant to the head coach. He's not an official assistant, but John Budmeyer is working with the quarterbacks, not on the field because he can't officially, but, doing that sort of thing. I mean, it's all to, you could say is it all to help Brian succeed or help the team succeed? And I think it might be one and the same, that if Brian succeeds, the team's going to succeed, right. But then ultimately that helps Brian in the future. But, there was always discussion that Brian was going to replace his dad. I was always one of the guys standing out and saying, I don't think that's the case.
I don't think that's going to happen.
And that will not happen now. Absolutely not. But he's got aspirations beyond being an offensive coordinator at Iowa, but you're going to have to do something with your current job to get to another one.
Tony Washlin. Okay. I just butchered that name. I have no idea. Washlin. Well, Tony asks, says Mike Riley and Scott Frost did not seem to understand the Big Ten. Run the ball, stop the run. You can't do that. You can't win. Do you think that's still true? Or is that something that's just hung around for a long time?
No, I think there is some truth to that, because if you can't stop the run, you're dead. And I think, whether it's, we're approaching the last year of the Big Ten West, but I do think it's true in this conference or this division, because you look at the teams that have been successful over the years, they've all had that element, except for Purdue. And that was that last year was their only year, and they were 6-3 and won the division. So I think there's just you do have to make sure that you're able to run when you want to, and you're able to stop them from doing it, because otherwise that physicality takes a toll. I mean, Wisconsin, and whether they're running mostly gap scheme and counter, and it's if you can't prepare for that 325-pound sledgehammer coming your way, you're dead in the water. And then likewise with Iowa, with its zone, if they're reach blocking you, you're dead in the water there too. And we've I know you've seen it, and we've seen it, and what Minnesota's been that way. Right. So you just I do think that you've got to. The thing is, I think you need to match the physicality of your neighborhood. If you can do that, then you can do whatever the hell you want to do. You can line up and go 5 wide or whatever. But but I think if you match the physicality of your neighborhood, if Nebraska's on the same level physically as Iowa and Wisconsin year in and year out, Minnesota, then do whatever you want after that. It doesn't matter, and you can win your games. It's just, but when you can't, then you're operating at a deficit. Maybe you win like last year, but overall, it's going to be tough to get an up and an out.
Okay, we're going to turn to the defense. Before we go right into the defense, I am a Green Bay Packer guy. And the Green Bay Packers in the first round drafted an Iowa player. And I looked at this and I went, who the hell is that guy? And I have no idea who he was. What? Tell me that he was worthy of a first round pick and that he's going to be fine and a great Packers Hall of Famer.
Hall of Famer, I don't know. That's a great franchise. There's a history there that goes on and on and on. But I'll say number 90 now. That's what he's going to wear for the green and gold. Lucas Van Ness is a terrific player, and he didn't start a game. And I know that's been the discussion. How can you draft a guy in the first round who never started a game? Well, at Iowa, here was the situation he faced, and he had 2 fifth-year guys starting at defensive end. And he was a redshirt sophomore, and so they went with their guys that had a lot of equity in the program. They'd done it all. They earned the starting role, and he played more snaps than they did. So when it came down to crunch time, he was on the field. The last 2 years, he led the team in sacks, both as kind of playing an interior rush position as a sub package his first year, and then last year mostly outside. His nickname's Hercules, and you look at the body of him and you're like, damn, I wish I had that. But he'll be fine for Green Bay. And I know Iowa really would have loved to have had him back, but hey, if you're going to be a first rounder, you can't blame him. But, redshirt sophomore, if, this year he would have been a starter, no question. There was not even
Okay, John, are you happy? His explanation about why they made that pick is probably a much better explanation than I provided to the world last week.
I feel better about it. But that takes us to the defense, Todd, and you can go ahead and ask about Phil.
Phil,
yeah.
If I was starting a college football team at a Division I school anywhere in the United States, before I hire the head coach, I'm hiring Phil Parker. You said he's entertained, or no, you didn't say entertained. Yeah. You said that he has been contacted by SEC schools. I got to believe that any school that wants to contend for a national championship at some point's reached out to him. Tell us about Phil Parker. What's the magic with this guy?
It's amazing because he was a Michigan State 3-time first-team All Big Ten safety back in the 80s. Played for for Norm Parker, who was the defensive coordinator there, and he went to Toledo for 10 years, and then he came to Iowa. He's got his family was raised. His son and his daughter were raised here. His son works for him as an analyst, and he was a secondary coach under Norm, and then he took over at DC, and he's just. The way he teaches the secondary is magic. It's the best that there is. And it's funny because, Kirk worked with Nick Saban and Phil worked under Nick Saban at Toledo and at Michigan State, even as a GA. And Phil's probably a little bit better as far as a defensive backs coach than Nick Saban is. And it's geometry based. You're going to be here. They play eyes on the quarterback, zone defense, quarter, half. And, it's like everything's geometrical. Like, okay, it's X number of yards from the paint of the 20-yard line to the sideline. Where are you when the ball is placed here? And you're here every single time. And he's played guys who are not nearly as talented, but can play the defense better than, and we've seen some kids like, Julius Brents, who was a 2nd-round draft pick who went to the Indianapolis Colts, did not start over Riley Moss. And so he transferred, and Riley Moss is a 3rd-rounder and, had 3 pick sixes and 11 interceptions, but Riley knew how to play the defense just a little bit better. And of course he was a great athlete as well, but that and the teaching up front is really the separator. The way they 2-gap most of the time, and they play a style that just it's really unselfish up front, but it's so technically based that every time they know where to be. They're usually there. Even kids like a Nathan Budgeta or Noah Shannon, who's now a 6-year guy, 6 foot, 185 or 285 pounds, and they're always in the right spot. And so that's really, to me, the essence of what Phil does is it's all about, and they do, one of the things that they've sacrificed on, and this comes back to Kirk a little bit, is if they've got a player who could play either side and they're flipping a coin, when it comes to the defensive back or wide receiver, they'll play defensive back. Micah Hyde probably being at the top of the list, who's still in the NFL. He would have been maybe one of the better receivers they ever had, but they just decided defense is a little bit more important, and that's why they've been so successful.
Okay, so Iowa turns out these excellent defensive players, and they were doing that when Norm was around too.
Yeah.
So how come we got Diaco? What the hell? What the hell with Bob Diaco? I mean, was that a plant or what?
Hey, I don't know what happened there, because when I saw him, I'm like, whoa, I remember him a little bit. Back when I was in college, he was in college. I went to Western Illinois, but I did help out. He's a different guy. But, Chenander, he was around this program too. And, I guess I remember when Bo Pelini had and some of the defensive linemen that were there, Malik Collins and Valentine, and they were tough dudes, and Randy Gregory, and I thought they played some pretty good defense for the most part. I thought they were undisciplined at times, that they kind of were freelancing a little bit, and that's what cost them against like Melvin Gordon. But by and large, I thought that's kind of the blueprint, though, for what you want to do. You got Levante David and Denard and guys like that. Those are Big Ten caliber players. It's just switching defenses, switching styles a lot. Guys throwing out there, getting a transfer like Mathis who doesn't pan out, and you think he's going to. So with Iowa, that's why. There are a lot of homegrown guys that just really they get put in kind of in that mindset. It's not the military, but it's pretty close, and they grind them up, and then that's how they play. And they sometimes, to me, they probably go too deep, too hard into November. Sometimes their practices are what's the phrase, bloodbaths. Banker said that one year.
Yeah,
they do go too far doing that, but overall, it seems to help their mentality and why they've been so successful.
So Todd and I were at that Melvin Gordon game. So thanks for bringing up.
Yeah, thanks for reminding us.
Thanks for the pain of that, Scott.
Yeah, I can't argue with you. They were great talents up front. They were mean, tough sons of guns. But I think freelancing is an appropriate term for a lot of the defensive players that we've seen at Nebraska recently, not playing within the system.
Yeah.
So moving to the defense, what's the defense look like in 2023? Riley Moss is gone, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Captain Jack.
Yeah. That's a big loss. Losing, 3 NFL draft picks and Kayvon Merriweather, who probably should have been, and he was a free agent. That is going to leave a mark, but in some ways they're like defensive line, they're probably deeper than they've ever been. They're going to go 9 or 10 deep. And this is a unit that 5-6 years ago was hoping to get to 6. And now they're at 9 or 10. There's not really a Lucas Van Ness All-American, although Deontay Craig has a chance to be in that category. And their biggest talent is probably a true sophomore, Aaron Graves, who rotated last year, and he's a true sophomore. He was good enough where he was a true freshman. He was rotating. In the defensive backfield, Cooper DeJean is, kind of a freak. And I think he's a guy that's, he had 3 pick sixes last year. 5 interceptions, 3 pick sixes. Yeah.
Cooper DeJean.
Yeah.
Why on God's green earth, when the Hawkeyes were struggling at the end of the year with the whole quarterback situation, why wasn't he the one that kid was an incredible high school quarterback? Amazing.
that's been one of the biggest discussion points here all these years. I mean, we've had issues over the years about Desmond King. Should he play offense like Jabril Peppers did at Michigan? Cooper is absolutely somebody who should have maybe played wide receiver. But when he went out in the Nebraska game, he got blindsided upside the head. The one thing Mickey Joseph noticed right away was, hey, we got the fastest Big Ten receiver, and they have a true freshman who's the backup, and attacked him right away, 87 yards, and then another touchdown later in the game. It was a smart thing to do. I'm not saying that they would have won or whatever, but maybe it was
a big loss.
You're not giving up an 87-yard touchdown like that, but no, he's as good as they've ever had at that position. Xavier Wampa is a 5-star. He replaced Kayvon, who opted out of the bowl game and then had a pick 6 in that. Quinn Schulte, this is the weirdest one, is Iowa's had like a walk-on, most of the time from parochial schools, walk-on in-state kid who always starts at safety, and they're always good. And Quinn Schulte's the latest in that line. Cornerback, the opposite, replacing Riley Moss is tough, but Jamari Harris, who's out all last year after having surgery. The year before, he had 4 interceptions as a backup. So, they just kind of have this secondary that I think is in good shape. Their depth is a little bit of a question mark. They still might want to go to this transfer portal for another corner, maybe to battle with Harris, maybe to be the 6th guy. But other than that, they're in pretty good shape there. So, but Cooper DeJean is he's a first rounder, I think, and Iowa hasn't had a first round defensive back under Kirk Ferentz.
He may have been the most exciting high school football player in the state of Iowa in the last 10 to 15 years. That kid, just absolutely incredible. Incredible.
Yeah.
Oh my God, this is an Iowa love fest.
Well,
what the hell is going on here?
I'm trying to be diplomatic. I've held back, John, but I'm going to give credit to those Iowa kids because I'm an Iowan, not an Iowa Hawkeye. That's 2 different things. But I am going to ask you a question because I don't want to get way off track here, but it is just something I'm curious about. The Iowa State rivalry from the Iowa perspective. Iowa State has no greater goal than to beat Iowa. And Iowa State fans just live for that.
Mm-hmm.
Is the Iowa State game just another game for Hawkeye fans?
It's a big game, and it really depends on where you live in the state of Iowa. I would say that how the state is kind of divided is how Iowa fans feel about their different rivals. Because what is unique about Iowa is they really have 4 that you could throw in and say, these are our rivals, but which one? Well, again, that kind of depends on where you live. If you're in central Iowa, it is Iowa State. In the Des Moines area, that whole, because you live it every day. You've got a Cyclone fan sitting next to you at school, church, wherever, your workplace, and the jawing is nonstop. If you're in Western Iowa, Council Bluffs, Sioux City, it's probably Nebraska because you got to talk to a lot of people, who are Nebraska fans. In the Eastern Iowa area, which is where I live and where the campus is, it just kind of depends on it's Wisconsin more because it's actually a pretty close campus. It's only about 2.5 hours away, and their styles are similar, and they battle a lot of times for the upper level of the Big Ten West. So, Minnesota is its oldest rival, and they play for the best trophy in my eyes in the Floyd of Rosedale. So you throw those in, and it just kind of depends on the situation. But I think here where I'm at, it's more Big Ten oriented. Like once you get done with the Iowa State game, it's kind of over with and you move on. It's big for the week, but for Iowa State fans, it's, and they haven't had their rivals. They've always been the small dog in the rivalry sector. They look at, Nebraska, beat them like a hammer to a nail for 100 years. And, Missouri was never really a rival. They were just lived next door and fought for 100 years. And, Kansas and Kansas State kind of are, but it's kind of like Iowa, Purdue. I mean, they've played for 90 times, but it's kind of a rivalry, I suppose, but not, that's kind of the way they are too. So, but they have to deal with it. And then Iowa beat them 15 years in a row, and Iowa State hasn't had any kind of they've never had a 10-win season. So they look at their rival across the state as, this is a big deal. And of course, last year they beat Iowa and then ended up 4-8. So,
oh yeah.
So they gave up everything to beat Iowa, I suppose.
Okay, so from everything you've described, Iowa sounds like an 8 or 9 win team. Is that correct?
I think they can go better than that, actually.
Really?
I think so. I think they're a pretty good team this year. I think they're very. When you start to look at, I don't know if the defense will be quite as good, but I think it'll be pretty good. I think the offense should be better, and then you start to look at, okay, they don't play Ohio State and Michigan, they do play Penn State, but when you look at the losses they had last year and how pathetic that offense was, you figure that's probably worth. They lost 9-6 at Illinois, they lost 10-7 to Iowa State. There's a couple of games there where you feel like Iowa with a little bit better offense probably wins, and so I kind of think they're the favorite in the West. So
you don't need to tell us about close losses.
That's true. What the champion of the close losses in 2001, right?
Close losses.
Yeah.
Best 3-9 team in the country.
Yeah.
So
history.
you think they can be a 10-win team?
Yeah, I do.
Have you said this anywhere else?
Yeah, I said it. I was at a Kansas City iClub event over the weekend. I actually went down there and I said, I think they could win, 10 plus games because, they got to go to the road to Penn State. That's going to be tough. They got to go to the road to Wisconsin, to Nebraska, to Iowa State. Those are all going to be challenging games for Iowa, along with having, Purdue and Illinois at home and Minnesota. But you look at those games and you think, well, why, there's no reason they can't win them either. Other than maybe Penn State on the road, that they will be a significant underdog. So, again, better offense, comparable defense. Yeah, I think they could be better than what they were 2 years ago when they went to Indianapolis.
All right, we're going to take some more comments. We usually do about an hour, but I've saved one question for the last, just for discussion. Yeah. But let's see. Let's go with James Marshall comes in with, do you see Illinois as a threat to taking Iowa's place as being the division standard for toughness and fundamentals?
I think you got to be cognizant of Illinois having some heavy potential with Brett Bielema. He understands how to build a program in this part of the world. He didn't have a lot of success at Arkansas, but he did at Wisconsin. And he was taught at Iowa. He played for Hayden Fry. He coached under Kirk. He coached under Barry Alvarez. He coached under Bill Snyder, Bill Belichick. He understands how to do it. And last year, really in only his second year, they had a defense that could really compete with anybody in the country. So Illinois has always been, and I think, probably in the old world for you guys, but you felt maybe Missouri was that way, kind of the most underachieving program you'll see. When you look at Illinois, right, it is the absolute flagship institution for a state with 12 million, 15 million people, whatever it is in Illinois. And yet to be this inconsistent and down most of the time, you're like, why? Well, now Brett understands that you have to go to these small towns where Iowa has picked them over, where, FCS teams in Northern Illinois is gone. He's going to go get those guys. So I think in this part of the world now, that even though we're going to change out of divisions in another year or so, Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Nebraska, everybody's got to look at Illinois and say, yeah, this isn't just it's just Illinois. No, if Brett has them rolling, they're going to be a formidable opponent for years to come.
I would agree.
So you think the Big Ten West is rising?
Not this year, but I think when it comes to a full conference, that I think that you'll see a better, I really don't know what to think about Wisconsin right now.
Right.
What happened at their spring scrimmage game or whatever was a disaster offensively. 10 sacks, 5 interceptions. They're trying to go with an air raid approach, which is complete opposite of what they did. It might fall apart for them. And then what? I mean,
then we laugh. We laugh and point. That's what we do.
I think there will be a lot of that. But, with Matt Rule, I think he can do it. But can he do it? Well, I thought Scott Frost could do it too. So, I guess we don't know. And,
Right.
Pat Fitzgerald, I think is a heck of a coach. But I think with the transfer portal that program is going to be devastated because they're just not going to be able to get kids in every year. And I think Illinois is on the rise. Purdue, I do not know what to think right now with Ryan Walters. He was an excellent defensive coordinator, but Jeff Brom brought a different ball game, and it really worked for Purdue. If they can't get this, if Illinois is beating them for the tough guys, that's going to be awfully difficult for them to manage. So I think the West is capable of getting better. I think this year it might be a down year for the division, though.
Fred Sacco comes in with another question that seems pretty serious.
Yeah.
He says, Scott, is Nils Consortium getting any better, or is it still $5 gas cards at Stuckey's and a free pressed nut roll every month?
Oh, yeah. I've heard people like those. No, the NIL is going well. I mean, that's how they're getting, receivers. Caleb Brown from Ohio State, a 4-star he was on his way basically stopping in Iowa to go to Oklahoma and Texas A&M. So for them to be able to keep him here, that's a big deal. And they're able to land a pretty decent quarterback and tight end as well, at least profile wise. So it's going well for the football program. I think men's basketball has probably got some work to do there. But is it as good as Nebraska's? I don't know. I think it all remains to be seen how this is going to work out, but enough people have subscribed to where I think, if you can get 8 and I haven't even mentioned Nick Jackson, the starting middle linebacker. He was 2-time second team all ACC with 100 tackle plus seasons at Virginia. And he's going to be the guy stepping in for Jack Campbell.
Okay, let's see. Lemansky comes in again, and he says, Scott, as a Hawkeye, love the Iowa fan base. Oh, my God. What have I done to my... What have I... This is a Hawkeye Nation show tonight. Love the Iowa fan base. Comment on the Husker fan base. I respect them highly.
Well, okay. I'll just be honest here. I mean,
before you start this, I'll say this. You get the crap beat out of you on Twitter.
I do.
I admire your willingness or your ability to, not do what I do. It's just immediately just go to words that the FCC finds radio stations for. So go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'll say this: that I got beat up pretty good for using starting from scratch for a phrase on the West Division, talking about Nebraska, and then a bunch of I got really hammered by Nebraska fans for using that phrase, and then Matt Rule used it, and I'm like, "See, I told you." God, but I thought that was kind of funny. But no, I mean, when you talk about fan bases. And there's a lot of kudos that need to go around. I mean, a team that's not had this kind of success. And I mean, some of the don't throw tomatoes at me, but I mean, you're 13th in wins among Big Ten schools in the last 5 years. And, the only Power 5 team not to go to a bowl game since, 2017 and still selling out the stadium. And even if it's fuzzy math or whatever you want to call it, I don't care. I mean, it still have, 75, 80,000 people there and the tickets are all sold is still a big deal because, I can go to Indiana's Memorial Stadium and it's, there are bigger crowds for basketball sometimes than there are for football. So it is remarkable to see, how, there's been no let up in the interest or the passion of the fan base. And, it's easy to, whether it's, and I'm not, and I try to be this, I try not to engage as a, I don't do fan stuff because I truly save my fandoms for the NFL. But, I will say, it's easy to kind of mock at times when, it's like the off season's coming. Okay. Things are going to rev up. It's going to be, Nebraska's going to win the national title this year. And then, oh man, it's another.
We have won the national title. The 2023 offseason is ours.
Yeah.
Okay. This last question comes from Husker Chuck, and he asked it a long time ago. And I thought, why not ask? And Husker Chuck says, "Can I ask about Iowa's claimed 1958 national title? Basically, I'm confused as to the circumstances. What's up with that? Do you know
Well,
your Iowa history that well?"
I do. I mean, they have pieces of five. They've all happened way before I was born, so I'm not going to get high and mighty on it. But I will say the '58 one, they got the football writers one, the Grantland Rice Trophy. The AP one went to LSU. Iowa went to the Rose Bowl, won it, won the Big Ten. Was voted, I think, second by AP and won from the Football Writers of America. So, back then, there's a bunch of different guys that, bunch of different polls. I mean, in the 20s, they claim them, and one a year it's totally legit. I think I wrote it in 2021. It was a 100-year anniversary of them beating Newt Rockney's team. But that happened so long ago. And even when I always look at it is when the players were born after certain things, it's time to move on. And Iowa's getting there too when it comes to Big Ten titles, because 2004 was the last time they have a share of a Big Ten title. So I think once that starts to happen, it's just for old people like me to chat about the '85 Bears, which I hate doing it these days.
All right, one more thing I want to ask. I know I said an hour, but we have you, so there you go.
Yeah.
Do you have to go anywhere? How long?
No.
4 or 5 hours? Okay.
No.
What do you? This is our final year, and then the next year, I mean, college football really kind of changes more than it's changed in a very long time. You're going to have a 12-team playoff, but I think the biggest change is that USC and UCLA will join the Big Ten. What do you think the impact of that is going to be? I mean, we're looking at a Big Ten West where I would say you always wanted to coach because you're one step away from a Big Ten title, and then you're one step away from a college football playoff, and that's not going to be true anymore in a year.
It's what's going to be fascinating is, I think, if your goal is to reach the playoff, and I think for the teams in this neighborhood today, that's probably the right approach. Get to the playoff. If you win a game, if you host a game, that's a big deal. Winning the championship in a playoff is something that you just kind of put out there. And if it happens, awesome. But let's not worry about that right now. And I think that if you consider yourselves, hey, if we can get to the top 3 in the Big Ten, you're all right. You're going to get in the playoff, and you might get a home game. And if you can get a home game, it's instantly one of the biggest games in school history in that stadium. I mean, can you imagine whether it's at Memorial Stadium or Kinnick Stadium, and you're playing Florida in the second week in December, or Iowa is, or whatever, Wisconsin is. I mean, that is like, you don't even know. I can't even imagine what that would be like.
I never even thought of that, but you're right. That would be the most, weirdest thing ever.
Nebraska's obviously had some unreal games with Oklahoma, Colorado, and some other schools in the past. Iowa's had a lot of, pretty good games, but that would just vault to the top of the list. I mean, as far as great games go, adding USC and UCLA, I think what it does change, travel, and we all know the logistics, but it's also about, who you play and how often you play them. And, one of the things that still remains to need to be settled for the Big Ten is, how do you divide up the who you play and what regulate and when you play them. And so, like, they're either going to go with a 3-team, 3 protected rivals and cycle through everybody else, twice every 4 years, or 2 teams, and then it kind of is more skewed, or it's going to be a hodgepodge. And see, like a team like Iowa has 3 teams that probably would want to play every year: Nebraska, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. But,
right,
maybe Nebraska's like, well, as long as we play Iowa every year, and, we're all right, we'll play whoever. Or if you're USC and UCLA, it's like, just let us play each other every year, and we don't care. Or Maryland and Rutgers, nobody really wants to play them anyway. So you've got all these factors kind of at play.
Right.
So it very well could be this, jagged situation where maybe Michigan plays just Michigan State and Ohio State. Iowa plays Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Nebraska. but Nebraska just plays Iowa and cycles through everybody else a little bit more often. And that's not the worst thing anymore. Just protect the rivalries that need to be protected and then cycle through everybody else. Because one of the things I was starting to worry about with the Big Ten was that it used to be this all for one for all. And then once they went to divisions, and then Michigan in particular started getting better, and Ohio State became great, that it started to split and
Right.
fracture, and became Big Ten East, Big Ten West. And it was never like that before. So I think that's probably something that's going to be helpful to the Big Ten as a whole. It still may be skewed in that direction, but I'm also like, yeah, I've seen Wisconsin knock the crap out of Michigan enough times, and I've seen Iowa win, up until recently, they'd won 5 out of 6 against Michigan. So, it's capable, everybody's capable of winning some of these games. And as long as, if Nebraska shoots for a 10 win season in the Big Ten, I think you got a really good chance of getting to the playoff. And if you're at 10 or 11, even if you're not getting Indianapolis, then you got a chance to host a game. And again, I just can't imagine anything bigger for one of these campuses than a December home game against an SEC team in their stadium.
Todd, do you have anything else?
No, I tell you what, I really appreciate Scott joining us tonight. And, I can't wait until Black Friday next year. That's something I always look forward to. And I don't want to see Iowa win 10 games next year, but
four. They can have 4. Four. Yeah.
So, no. Anyway, right now Iowa is. I'm not going to say it's a golden era because that's overstating it, but Iowa men's athletics are playing very well right now, and it's if you're a Hawkeye fan, enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, after the basketball era before Fran, I think people they still want to get to the second weekend. They haven't done that in 25 years. So that's a big deal there. But women's basketball was something out of this world this year.
It was.
So that kind of dwarfed a little bit of the football talk for a while. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Well, with the news today, I mean, it could damage a lot of stuff, and we'll see what happens. So
yeah,
maybe they will win 4 games.
They might. I thought last year was that year, but
Okay, Scott, we only sign off of this show. We just say goodnight, and then stick around for a minute because I have a couple questions for you after the show.
Okay.
So good night, Todd. Good night, Scott.
Good night, John. Good night, Scott. Thank you.
No.